Hey, everybody. I would like to talk to you today about something I've been looking into and studying for the last year, which is this subject of luck. Good luck, specifically. There's bad luck. We will avoid talking about that. If you want to sort of check out this presentation now, if you want the sort of the high-level, too long, didn't read version of it, I would say it's this. Good luck is hard work. And I want to talk a little bit about what that work is, how we can do it, and how we can sort of bring it into our organizations, bring it into our businesses, find a way to really harness luck, take an approach that is thoughtful, that is planned, that is systematic. So when I started researching the subject of luck, it kind of got a little tricky because I would tell people in the business world, people who are focused on process, they're focused on routine, they're focused on risk mitigation, they're focused on a lot of the things we focus in the business environment on. You try and bring up the subject of luck, and it can get a little squishy, it can get a little difficult for people. It's not necessarily something that they want to engage with. So when this happens, I like to pull out a couple of quotes. The first is one from this guy, Sergey Brin. You might know him as the co-founder of Google, one of the two. I saw him do a presentation in 2006, the Web 2.0 presentation, not long after they'd gone public, and he said something on stage. The first thing he said, actually, to the interviewer, John Battelle, it really stuck with me for years and years. Battelle asked him, again, this is not long after they've gone public, in an environment where not many companies are succeeding on the web in 2006. Battelle asks him, what's the secret of your success? And Brin replies, without hesitation, oh, that's easy. The number one factor that contributed to our success was luck. Just interesting thing for him to say. And then I noticed a newspaper article from the other day. The subject, the winners of the moment, the Instagram founders, this is Kevin Systrom, gets the same question, I guess, because if you make $1 billion in 2 years, that's the first thing everybody wants to know is, how did you do it? And Systrom responds, as much as entrepreneurs want to take credit for each and every little decision and say it made complete sense at the time, I promise you, a lot of it is luck. So I think it's really interesting. Both these guys said that, two of the big winners of the last decade. And here's what I think about what they're saying and why I think talking about luck in a systematic, programmatic way is really important to thinking about how we build businesses. By crediting their fortune, and I guess their fortunes, to luck, I don't think that either Brin or Systrom are abdicating their agency. They're not trying to say, hey, this isn't something that I did, it's not something I'm responsible for. What they are doing instead is acknowledging that for something to succeed with the speed and the scale that Google did, or the speed and the scale that Instagram did, requires more than any one person or even any team of people can take credit for. It's not just the 35 million users. There is more to it than any one person can know. There is more that is unknown. So I think if we want to learn to succeed with the same speed and the same scale in our businesses, we also need to learn how to systematically, methodologically engage with the unknown. So that is what I would like to talk to you about today. It's this concept of serendipity. So if luck is a tricky thing to talk about, serendipity as a word is even trickier, since it usually just ends up in self-help manuals. But I'm here to reclaim the term for us. I want to talk about serendipity as a very specific subspecies of luck, the kind of luck that we have agency in, the kind of luck that our actions can affect. Just to give you a definition of serendipity, to start to get a little more rigorous about this. This is a definition that comes from a Dutch serendipitologist, that's what he calls himself, a fascinating man named Peck van Andel. He defines serendipity as the art of the unsought finding. I like that quite a bit. It's nice and compact. Another way to say it that's a little less compact is looking for one thing and finding another. That's serendipity. It's a little tricky, and yet, if you think about what an organization like Google does, if you think about what the Instagram founders did, that is essentially what happened. If you think of the story of their business, and I think it's something that we also can learn to programmatically start to explore. Because we are trying to make it a little more systemic, my business partner and I came up with an equation, and this is it. Serendipity is chance plus creativity Chance defined as everything we can't know, everything we can't predict, everything we can't expect, understand, or know necessarily that it's out there, even though it might turn out to be very necessary to us. And creativity. Creativity defined as our ability to make something new and meaningful in the world, right? That is the essence of creativity. It is our actions, our ability to embody change in the world. So while we have this definition, this equation, now if we want to create more serendipity in our lives, if we want more stuff that we didn't know we need to find us, then it stands to reason we have to do one of two things. We have to, or both. We have to increase the number of chance encounters with things we have in our life, and we have to be more creative. So I want to talk a little bit about how to do this. So we put together a framework. We call it Plan Serendipity. It's a little bit of a contradiction in terms. How can you plan for something that is essentially unplannable? And yet, when we talk about planned serendipity, what we're talking about is how can you create an environment? How can you create a situation in which lucky things are more likely to happen to you? That's the question. That I have, and that's the question I hope we can all answer today. So planned serendipity, it's a framework that we put together, and it goes a little something like this. It's pretty simple, actually. The funny thing about luck, when you start to research it, is it's actually a really fun topic to research. You basically go, you find really successful people, and then you ask them about their success, which is something that successful people like to talk about. And then specifically, you ask them to talk about the times in their careers, and all successful people have this, the times in their careers where something really important to them happened, right? But they couldn't have predicted it, they couldn't have expected it, and yet it turned out to be critical or necessary to their accomplishments. And then you basically reverse engineer it from there. You say, what were the behaviors you were engaged in at the time? What were the things that you were doing? And out of that, we get a really simple framework. You have to do these three things. The first is you have to do things to generate more chance opportunities. You have to do things to make it so that more unexpected stuff happens around you. That's the left side of the equation. The second thing you have to do is you have to recognize those opportunities when they're in front of you. And that sounds obvious, but the ability to be prepared to see something is actually a skill in and of itself. And then the third one is you have to be willing to take action on the ones that matter. And this is also important, because if you think about it, the essence of luck, the essence of serendipity, is you were doing one thing, and then something else different showed up, and you decided to do that other thing instead. And it turns out that that ability to do something different is also in and of itself a skill. So we refer to the first one of these as motion. Motion is your willingness to break out of your routine. The skill of motion is your willingness to get out into the world, to make something different happen, to go into a different environment. One easy way to think about it is that you want to have new experiences, but you want them in familiar contexts, right? So a terrific example of motion is actually the thing that we're all doing right now. It's going to a conference, it's going to a workshop, it's going to an event. If you think about it, lots of people have serendipitous experiences in environments like this one. And the reason is very simple. You're pulled out of your daily routine, you're put into an environment where you're encouraged to think, you're encouraged to interact, you're encouraged to do things differently. But that environment is filled with people who, while different from you, are still in some way engaged in the same thing. They're focused on similar topics, they're interested in things that are similar to the things that you're interested in, but they have different ideas, different experiences, different perspectives. And when you put yourself in an environment like this one, you make it more likely that you're going to run into something that you needed but didn't know that you needed. Right? Anybody in this room could have something for anybody else in this room. And it's the act of getting us all together in this room that makes it more likely that those things are going to find each other. One of my favorite stories about motion, and here's what I should say about luck. I think it's not just that we can engage in behaviors that will make us luckier, that will create more serendipity in our lives. Since organizations, through culture, through structure, can actually encourage or discourage different kinds of behaviors, we can also actually think about ways to make businesses luckier, to create more serendipitous organizations, because we can construct organizations that actually encourage the kinds of behaviors that we know create more serendipitous occurrences. My favorite example of this is actually the building from Pixar. So I am going to tell a Steve Jobs story because that's requisite in every TED presentation. I believe it's actually in the instructions. But I'm going to tell the Steve Jobs story about Pixar instead of about Apple. So Right after the Toy Story comes out, the first Pixar movie, it's a big success, and they decide to redo the Pixar campus. So Steve Jobs being Steve Jobs, he goes, he sees the original plans, he says these are terrible, he tears them up, he designs a new building. And he does this one thing in the building that is so interesting, and it was very much with this intent to create serendipitous experiences. He takes, it's one large campus, one large building, all the different departments, the different people are in their little pods, but he says, okay, every single thing in the business that is a shared service, the lunch line, the cafeteria, the copy room, the mailboxes, whatever, everything that everybody in the building would need to use, I want them all in the same place in this giant atrium in the middle of the building. This means that anytime you need to get up and do something that's not department specific, you have to get up and you have to walk to the same place in the building. The sort of legend has it that he actually tried to put all the bathrooms there too, but that was vetoed for logistical reasons. But everything but the bathrooms is in the same place. And he did that simply because he knew that if that were the case, when you got up to go to the lunch line, to the copy room, you would run into somebody. It was really that simple. And if you talk to any employee of Pixar, and I live right across the bay from them, so I talk to them all the time, they will tell you that this is an incredible thing, that it works unbelievably well, that many of the things that, if you've seen and loved Pixar movies, many of the things that you've seen and loved are actually a result of the design of this building and the way that these collisions, these creative, unexpected collisions happened between different people, different levels of the hierarchy, different departments. So breaking out of that routine was actually what Jobs was trying to achieve with this building when he sort of built it for serendipity. So that's how you can create chance opportunities in your own life, in the organizations that we build. We can sort of work towards this. But it doesn't mean anything if you can't see them. So we think of the second skill, if you can't see them, if you can't recognize them when they show up. So we call the second skill preparation. And preparation literally just means that you have the mental ability to connect disparate ideas, disparate people, disparate events in ways that other people might not see or recognize. And this is a huge part of luck, is just being able to see it when it shows up. My favorite story from this is actually, some of you might recognize this painting. It's Marcel Duchamp. It's one of his later larger works. It's called The Large Glass, or The Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelors Even. It's a really beautiful piece. It's in Philadelphia right now, if you ever end up in Philadelphia. The story behind this piece that I really love, and that I think makes Duchamp such an intriguing artist, is he spent years and years working on this. This is one of the panes. It's 2 large panes of glass. He's exhibiting it in a museum. After the first exhibit, it's a glass painting and it's huge, so it's kind of tricky to move. So the movers go, they do everything that they can to keep it from breaking, they package it up, they move it, they drop it, it shatters, right? So this is sort of his masterpiece. And after its first exhibit, which is actually at the Brooklyn Museum, it falls on the ground and it shatters. So for most of us, this would be horrifying. Duchamp is ecstatic. He's so excited. He spends the next 2 years of his life gluing it back together and says it's his masterwork. He says that he says it's better, it's 100 times better. That sort of it embodies sort of the concept of destiny. So this, to me, is what preparation is about. It's about being able to see opportunity where everybody else misses it. A great story here actually comes from a guy named James Slatter, who is the person who invented what would ultimately be known as NutraSweet. NutraSweet in Equal, and many of us all used it in our coffee. It's an artificial sweetener. James Slatter is the guy who invented the artificial sweetener industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry now. At the time that he invented it, however, he was not trying to find an artificial sweetener. He was actually a scientist working for a pharmacologist or a pharmacology named G.D. Searles. He was looking to find an anti-ulcer medication. So he's doing the things scientists do. He's mixing chemicals in beakers. One of the chemical combinations actually spills over the top, kind of blows up, spills onto his hand. Didn't work out. Oh well, he moves on to the next one. A little bit later in the day, he's actually going to read through a book. He puts his finger in his mouth and he licks it, as many people do right before they turn a page, and he notices that it's incredibly sweet. Right? So this is the story of how a multi-billion-dollar industry of artificial sweeteners came about. It was a guy who was trying to find an anti-ulcer medication who happened to accidentally lick his finger while he was flipping the page of a book. But what's so interesting to me about this idea of preparation, is that, think about what it would take from there to get from there to, he could just as easily, from there to this industry, right? He could just as easily have dismissed that. Right? He could have let it go. He could have said, oh, my finger's really sweet. That's not the thing I'm trying to do right now. the thing I'm trying to do right now is, sort of work on this anti-ulcer medication. He didn't. Instead, he thought, oh, there might be something here. And that, in that tiny moment, is this opportunity, is everything that matters when it comes to being prepared. It's being ready to see that chance occurrence when it happens. As with Steve Jobs and Pixar embedding this culture of serendipity right into the building, we can do the same thing with preparation. We can create organizations that are designed to encourage this kind of behavior. This is a small San Francisco design company that's done a lot of really well-known designs, cell phones, Amazon Kindle, all sorts of stuff. Snowboards, they're a product design firm, they're really talented. In 2007, HTC, the phone manufacturer, actually purchased them because they were so taken by their phone designs that they basically wanted to bring it in-house. And the reason I tell this story is because the One & Company team, as part of the agreement when they got acquired, said to HTC, we're happy to be acquired by you because you're going to be giving us a lot of money, but we refuse to do it unless you agree to let us continue to work on other kinds of projects besides phones. And the reason that they did this is that they understood that their ability to work across so many different kinds of products and product lines was a significant part of the reason that they were so successful. And the classic story, the one that they told to HTC to convince them that they should do this, they told them, that phone that you really love, there was a phone from HTC at the time that had this really fantastic and well-regarded rubber backing. And the One & Company team said, the reason that we were able to do that is because we'd actually been working on a snowboard at the time. And this is a rubber. The rubber that we ended up using on your phone is actually a really common rubber to use for the casings on snowboards. And it was just one of our designers who realized when we were talking about the back of your phone, oh, hey, that rubber that's over here, we could pick it up, put it down over there. So again, this is a way in which they're actually actively thinking about how do we structure our organizations so that we can encourage those kinds of connections, we can create the opportunity and have the opportunity to see it. And then the third thing, which is in some ways the most important, is this idea of divergence. The skill of divergence, which simply means being willing to do something different. And this is so important because I think so much of what we do in business is about process. It is about routine. It is about doing the same thing over and over, only bigger and better. That's kind of what we built. That's sort of what we built, sort of the Western economy on top of. Process, routine, control. And while all of those things are necessary and they're fantastic, all of the great leaps, all of the stories that I've told already have all come from moments in time where we thought we were going to do one thing and then we realized we needed to diverge and do something different. So my favorite story about divergence is actually the story of a complete failure to do so. This is a guy named James Marshall, I think James Marshall is actually the least lucky person on the planet, or was at the time, since obviously this is from the 1850s. James Marshall was the very first person to find gold, right before the gold rush began, just outside of San Francisco. Here's the problem. James Marshall was not looking for gold at the time. James Marshall was actually looking to build an agricultural empire. He wanted to build a farming empire. One day, one of his workers comes to him and sort of furtively says, like, hey, I found this gold on your property. And Marshall looks at it and he goes, you need to hide that right now. I don't want anyone to see that, because if word gets out that gold is on my property, I won't be able to build my agricultural empire. Needless to say, word did get out. And Marshall lost what slight advantage he might have had for owning all of this land and getting the drop on everyone else when it came to discovering gold. So Marshall's problem, put really simply, not willing to diverge from the plan, not able to recognize that it's not enough to create the opportunity, and it's not enough to see the opportunity. If you're not willing to do anything about it, it's not luck. My favorite example of divergence comes from Amazon.com. You probably all remember a couple of years ago, Amazon basically invented the sort of industry of cloud computing when they launched S3 and EC2, which were these two. If you're familiar with the technology world, they basically made it really, really easy for anyone who wanted to run a website or a web service to get it up and running on their servers, basically very cheaply using all of Amazon's infrastructure to launch a server for a website or to host stored files. So these are things that have historically involved buying a bunch of servers and installing them, and it was very expensive, and Amazon basically showed up one day 4 or 5 years ago and said, hey, you can use our infrastructure, and for pennies where it used to cost you dollars. So this is a great example of divergence because, up until that point, we all thought of Amazon as first a bookstore, still kind of think of it as a bookstore, but then they sell everything, right? And yet they show up one day with this business that seems so different from the outside, but if you're talking to anybody on the inside of Amazon, it just seemed like the next logical progression. They had built this amazing server farm. They had built this amazing organization that could scale so well that they could actually take on customers from outside. So for them to take this thing that they'd built internally and figure out how to turn it into a business, make it external, just seemed like the next logical step. And I think for them, it might have been, but you imagine a company like Borders, the bookstore, doing that, or Barnes & Noble, the bookstore, doing that? No, it's because Amazon was, and Jeff Bezos in particular, was sort of a maestro of divergence. He was able to think bigger and more differently than just about anyone else. So that's it. That's sort of the breakdown, the simple breakdown of how luck works. I think if you are an entrepreneur, if you are inclined towards entrepreneurial activity, nothing that I've just said came across as rocket science, right? If you are an entrepreneur, odds are good that you are already engaged in all of these activities, right? I think that serendipity, this idea of planned serendipity, it's fundamentally an act of creation where more is unknown than is known, right? And our job, call it product market fit, call it whatever you want, is to find a way to fit our creation into the world. And the only way that we can do that is by actively, methodically seeking out the unknown. And so, I would encourage you, as your businesses grow, as they expand, to think, how can we be like the entrepreneurs? How can we be like Jobs with Pixar or Bezos with Amazon? How can we not fall prey to routinization, to sort of relying on the same thing day in and day out? How can we start to think about ways to bake this thinking about serendipity into our businesses, into the structures and the way that we work? And I wrote a book on this, just in case you want to read up more. Thanks for your time.